Good morning dear students. How are you? I hope all are fine. Okay, really many students are supporting me in good way, but still I want encouragement from you. So if in your relatives or friends any students are there, then please send my videos to them and let them to watch and let them to subscribe my channel. So I hope you will encourage me in this way, because I am giving best videos for you. So please encourage me. See, today's topic is spectrum or spectra. What is spectrum? The image recorded when radiant energy is passed through the prism is called spectrum. Overall second definition also there, that is the group of wavelengths or frequencies is called spectrum. Okay, now let me explain. See, now I took one source. Okay, now this source can release light. This is light. Okay, this light I am sending through the prism. Then after sending through the prism, here I am recording the image by using spectrography. Okay, then this image is called spectrum. That image is nothing but spectrum. Okay, see here simply the image recorded when the radiant energy is passed through the prism is called spectrum, or the group of wavelengths or frequencies is called spectrum. Okay, see this is simply about spectrum. Okay, next point is, second point is the splitting of white light into 7 colors is known as dispersion. White light is there, that white light can split into 7 colors if you pass through the prism. This is called dispersion. This phenomenon is called dispersion. Next, the device used to record the spectrum is called spectrograph or spectrometer. Remember, the device which is used to record the spectrum is called spectrograph or spectrometer. Okay, now let me discuss the types of spectrum. Okay, next let me discuss the types of spectrum. So spectrum is mainly divided into two types. What are they? First one is continuous spectrum, second one is discontinuous spectrum. Okay, now again discontinuous spectrum is further divided into two types. One is emission spectrum, second one is absorption spectrum. In that again emission spectrum further divided into two types, that is line spectrum, or it is also called atomic spectrum. Second one is band spectrum, it is also called molecular spectrum. Okay, now let me discuss these all types clearly. Okay, one type let me discuss clearly. In that first let me discuss continuous spectrum. Okay, now let me explain continuous spectrum. What is continuous spectrum? Continuous spectrum in the sense the spectrum of sunlight where one color merges in the sense combine into another color without any gap is known as continuous spectrum. Okay, best example is formation of rainbow. How rainbow can form? During the rain, during the rainfall, the sun rays can disperse it through the raindrops and it will form the rainbow. In that rainbow 7 colors will be vapour colors. 7 colors will be. In that 7 colors, if you observe the rainbow properly, without any gap, without any particular gap, that 7 colors merged. So it is the best example for continuous spectrum. What is continuous spectrum? Continuous spectrum in the sense without any gap, colors merges into another color. One color merges into another color. It is called continuous spectrum. Best example, formation of rainbow. How the rainbow can form? During the rainfall, the sun rays dispersed through the raindrops and it can form rainbow. Have you understood? Now let me discuss second type, that is discontinuous spectrum. Okay, next second one let me discuss, that is discontinuous spectrum. What is discontinuous spectrum? Discontinuous spectrum in the sense the spectrum is having well defined lines with gaps. Gaps in the sense dark areas is called discontinuous spectrum. What is continuous spectrum? Continuous spectrum in the sense one color merges into another color without any gap. That is called continuous spectrum. Now what is discontinuous spectrum? Here with gap. Have you understood? Continuous spectrum without gap, here with gap. That is called discontinuous spectrum. Now discontinuous spectrum is again classified into two types. That is absorption spectrum. Second one is emission spectrum. Now let me explain about absorption spectrum and emission spectrum. Okay, next one, see absorption spectrum. What is absorption spectrum? Absorption spectrum in the sense the spectrum obtained when the energy of the substance is absorbed is called absorption spectrum. Now how can you record the absorption spectrum? See, it is a source, it can release light. Now this light I am sending through the cool gas, then this cool gas can absorb some light, some amount of light, then it can release some amount of light. Now this released light I am sending through the prism, then we can get absorption spectrum. This is the recording of absorption spectrum. Simply, what is absorption spectrum? The spectrum obtained when the energy of the substance is absorbed, okay, is called absorption spectrum. What is example? Sodium vapor gives two dark lines at 5890 angstroms and 5896 angstroms in yellow region. This is the example for absorption spectrum. Next, how can you identify the absorption spectrum? See, it contains dark lines on the bright background. This is very important. Okay, it contains dark lines on the bright background. This is the identification of absorption spectrum. Next, the spectrum is discontinuous. Yes, of course, this is discontinuous spectrum. Okay. Next, the second one let me explain, that is emission spectrum. What is emission spectrum? The spectrum is obtained when the energy of the substance is emitted. Okay, but what is absorption spectrum? The spectrum obtained when the energy of the substance is absorbed there. Okay, here emitted. That is the main difference. Is called emission spectrum. Okay. Next, see, this is the source. It will release light. Now this light I am sending through the hot gas, but in absorption spectrum I send through the cool gas. Here hot gas. That is the main difference. Now this hot gas can emit some light and as well as it can absorb some light. Okay. Now that emitted light, now I am sending through the prism. Then we will get emission spectrum. Okay. See example, see sodium vapors gives two bright lines at 5890 angstroms and 5896 angstroms in yellow region. See now how can you identify the emission spectrum? Emission spectrum we will identify, see it contains bright lines on the dark background, but absorption spectrum reverse, dark lines on the bright background, that is absorption spectrum. Now for the emission spectrum, bright lines on the dark background. This is the main difference between emission spectrum and absorption spectrum. So absorption spectrum is also discontinuous spectrum, remember. Okay. Now emission spectrum is further divided into two types. One is line spectrum, it is also called atomic spectrum. Second one is band spectrum, it is also called molecular spectrum. Okay. Now what is line spectrum? Line spectrum in the sense, the line spectrum has sharp, distinct, well defined lines. Okay, it have sharp, distinct, well defined lines, and it is the characteristic of gaseous atoms, so it is also called atomic spectrum. Remember, line spectrum is also called atomic spectrum. Next, it is due to transition of electrons between energy levels in an atom. It is how it will form? It is formed mainly due to transition of electrons between energy levels in an atom. Next, it is given by inert gases. Inert gases, do you know? Like helium, neon, argon, krypton, xenon, radon. Inert gases and metal vapors and atoms. Okay. Next, what is band spectrum? Band spectrum in the sense, the band spectrum has many closed lines. It is the characteristic of gaseous molecules. So it is also called molecular spectrum. Remember. It is due to vibration and rotational changes of atoms in a molecule. How it will form? It is formed mainly due to vibrational and rotational changes in an atom of molecule. Okay. See next, it is given by hot metals and molecules. Have you understood? This is the main difference between line spectrum and band spectrum. Line spectrum is also called atomic spectrum. Band spectrum is also called molecular spectrum. Okay, this is the classification of emission spectrum. Okay, this is today's class. I hope you understood this class. If you like this video, then press the like button. Please subscribe my channel. Thank you. All the best.